Alright, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a very long time. My name is AK Rex, as you might know. Those who are regulars, those who are new, welcome to the channel. As always, I have with me John. Hello, John.
Hello.
Oh, yeah, it's been a while, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think the last time we did one of these, I was still in my master's program. So,
I feel like the last time we've done anything on the channel, it was just. It almost feels like it was a different era. I don't know.
yeah.
It's just been forever, and I'm sure. Well, I mean, obviously, to give you guys who are watching a bit of an insight, how do I explain this in a very short way? Adult life has its ways of taking over, so, and
Yep,
you
yep.
know, the actual real life job as well. So I have a lot of things going on when it comes to that, and I've got plans for summer, which I need to save up a lot of money for, as much as possible, I suppose. I mean, I don't know if it's gonna be a lot, but it's gonna be, I'll do my best. And yeah, that's basically the main reason why YouTube just has taken such a back seat that there has really been no actual opportunity to do anything. But today we decided to finally get around to starting the first episode of our second documentary review project. And yes, you guessed it. Obviously, uh, I mean, if you're looking at the screen, you would know what it is. It's Walking with Dinosaurs by BBC. And in case you are just listening as a podcast, if you are just, whether you're driving and you're just putting it on the volume only, then you know what it is. So uh, this will basically be the original, uh, all 5 episodes. Then we will also review the expansions, which are the Giant Claw, the Land of Giants, and the Ballad of Big Al. So those will definitely be reviewed. The only thing I don't know whether we will do at this stage anyway is the other Walking With projects from the series. We may do them, but I don't think we're gonna do them right away after the Dinosaurs done. So I don't know, John, what do you reckon? Shall we do the Dinosaurs first, and then after that do another documentary, and then after that maybe, we could get back into Walking With series, but do and pick up another piece.
I think we can flesh this out as we go, but I know that we've been talking about going over Prehistoric Planet. That's a big one. And I also know that this year, Walking with Dinosaurs 2 is coming out, and there's a good chance that maybe it would be a good opportunity to talk a little bit about that as well before we get into Walking with Beasts and Walking with Monsters. So that would actually be really interesting if we were to take the opportunity to compare a little bit Walking with Dinosaurs, the original, and this new series and see, well, this is their second attempt. This is their sequel series, essentially, um, or their reboot or remake or whatever you want to call it. How does it compare to the original? So I think that would be a really interesting discussion to have. And then if we want to, again, we can flesh this out, but I think we could do Prehistoric Planet or Walking with Dinosaurs 2 first, and then go on to Walking with Beasts and Walking with Monsters.
Yes, I basically agree with this idea. I think that the dinosaur content specifically would probably be the priority. It would probably be fair to say that anything to do with specifically dinosaurs will be the priority. But other ones, we will definitely try to squeeze them in because Walking with Beasts is absolutely amazing. I actually think, for me personally, when it comes to Walking With series, I found that to be the strongest of all of the Walking With series. For me personally, the dinosaurs one was the most iconic because it was the first one and because it's dinosaurs. But as far as what I believe was the quality and how it was done, presented, the stories that they've picked, uh, the only thing is, of course, I have yet to remember how actually well, you know, in terms of accuracy, has it been depicted by the standards of today, based on what we know now versus what has been before. And as a reminder to people who are watching this show, uh, what we do and the whole purpose of this project is to review all these different pieces of work and basically do it from the point of view in regards to how they would stand if they were produced exactly as they are, but today. So we do not try to necessarily excuse them because they were made back in the days. We of course do that as a passing note so that we remind people that, yeah, this happened, right? But primarily we focus on how it stands up to scrutiny if it were made exactly the same way, but in this day and age. And we're obviously doing whatever we can when it comes to using the actual data. We don't try to insert our own biases. If there is a bias, I always try to point it out. And some people who watch this, who are not, maybe biggest fans of mine, they might probably accuse me of being biased, which is fair enough. They might have that opinion, and that's fine. You're welcome to have that opinion. But I always like to make it clear where it might be a me thing going on or where there is actually an objective point to be made about something, and we will get to that at some point during the series, I'm sure. So, any last words before we get started, John?
Well, on the topic of bias, I will just say right off the bat, like I openly admitted to my bias towards when dinosaurs roamed America, back when we started this project, and because I really, really like it. And for those of you who are watching who are from the Discord, you will probably know, spoiler alert, I'm actually very, very critical of Walking with Dinosaurs. More specifically, particular episodes of Walking with Dinosaurs. So I'm gonna just open up with my bias right away, just to be aware, so that so that you guys are aware of it, and I'm aware of it, so that so that I can still be as objective as possible. Because I don't, believe it or not, despite my rants in the Discord, I don't actually hate all of Walking with Dinosaurs. There's actually a lot of things I like about it. It's just there's some things that really piss me off, but we will get to them. We will get to them. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. So whenever you're ready, I'm good to go.
Okay, I guess let's get started. So, the first thing I suppose we should look at is the episode 1, New Blood, in a chronological order, as we always, I suppose, would be doing it. And we have the setting, so I presume I should be on the right slide. They are in their certain order, which is where you feature the place, which is Arizona. We They claim, the episode states it's 220 million years ago. Chinle Formation is at least the way you put it there, and Norian stage, which
Yep.
is basically this time frame that is being listed. So, uh, any words about the setting?
So I'll just start off right off the bat by saying that one of the things that I think Walking with Dinosaurs does really, really well is its settings. And I think New Blood is one of the best examples of how they basically nail the setting for the Triassic, and more specifically the Chinle Formation. So based on what I know about the Chinle Formation, it was a seasonally arid environment. The idea that the region itself was prone to severe droughts. That sounds about right. It had very significant monsoon seasons. I believe there's a lot of fossils that of both plants and animals that indicate there was seasonal flooding as a result of these monsoons. These are not things that specifically is not depicted in the episode, but we do get to see a very nice contrast between the dry season and the wet season in the Chinle Formation, and I really like it. As far as where the plants, all I believe the episode was shot in New Caledonia, so that actually has a few plants that would have existed back during the Triassic period. So it's a perfect filming location. And on top of that, you will notice that New Blood has this sort of reddish hue to some of its shots, especially like in one of the pictures I have of the Placerias herd migrating towards greener pastures. There's several shots of animals in these barren, red, sandy wastelands. And from what I can tell, based on the geology of the Chinle Formation, the color of the sand is not just an aesthetic thing that's cool. That it's actually reflective of the color of the sand that would have been around back 220 million years ago. So the Chinle Formation, to the best of my knowledge, is described as being a very uh, well drained environment. What that means in geology terms is that the habitat would have had seasonal periods where water levels would have been very high, but they would have drained out and it would have been very low. So typically, a well drained environment means that it would have had intervals of wet and dry seasons, whereas a poorly drained environment would be something where water was staying within a particular area for an extended period of time. And usually, poorly drained environments are regions where you get a lot of coal in the rock record. So but to sum it up, I think the setting for New Blood is excellent. It's great. I love the shots they give this thing because it really makes me think that I'm in the Triassic period and more specifically the Chinle Formation. I just really love it. It's again one of my favorite settings of the entire series.
Okay, well, I can't say that I have a lot more to add, since, well, for two reasons. First, because I'm not nearly as good at understanding uh, environments and settings from, as far as paleontology side of things goes. And secondly, because you've already covered everything, so there is practically no point for me to repeat it. Um, I have to say that I noticed this a bit as well, that they had a bit of a hue there that you pointed out, and I was thinking to myself, is this a special effect just to, you know, just to dress it up a little bit, like a salad dressing, if you will, or
Yeah.
was that actually legit? And hearing and knowing now for certain that this is actually very much legit. That's how it would have looked like, or very close to that at least, to as far as we know anyway. Then that makes it even more so impressive, in my opinion. So, anything else to go over in the setting, or shall we move on to the next slide on the agenda?
I'm good to move on.
Okay, sounds fine. So, and that would basically be going over the animals, is that right? We're gonna go, or shall we go into other aspects before we go into the animals on the individually?
I think we can start with the animals. I think if we go through each of the animals individually, it'll make the other things that come after it make a little bit more sense.
Okay, let's do it that way then. So let's go with the Coelophysis first, which is also very interesting. That's the first creature that we're going to look at, and it's also, well, the first dinosaur that we get to see in the program. And as far as I can tell you, even right off the bat, I mean, without even saying anything else, this, I don't know. It's like I have this feeling that this is probably my favorite dinosaur design, I guess, in the entire franchise, more or less, give or take.
Really? Okay.
It's definitely at the top. I don't know, I haven't made up my mind, on a final note yet, but I'm very close to saying that it's at the top, probably five or three, for sure, for me. So
Gotcha. Gotcha.
I don't know, and it's, but then again, I could change my mind later. Maybe it will be much easier for me to make my final verdict when we get to all of the episodes, and I'm not saying the main ones, but also including the expansions, and then maybe I can decide which ones would be my probably my top picks for the designs when it comes to dinosaurs and maybe other animals as well. But I am very, very much in favor of this Coelophysis, the way it is portrayed. But it's just been so long since I've done in-depth look and review on creatures that maybe I'm missing something out. My personal notes on Coelophysis are that I've noticed that I believe that they have made it look like it has lips, but it was very hard to tell because even as far as the skeleton goes, Coelophysis' teeth are actually pretty small, to my understanding. They are not big teeth. And
Right, right.
whether they are just so well hidden because of their tiny size or whether it's because they added extra tissue was something I simply could not tell, and which is why I'm probably just not going to bring up that particular point for that very reason, since I cannot determine what exactly were they trying to portray there. I'm just going to write this off as simply because their teeth, when restored to full flesh and blood, they would just be a bit tiny. Yeah, because they are tiny as a skeleton, and they are also more of it is gonna be concealed as a result of flesh. No matter how much more, whether it's a tiny bit or not, it's still gonna be there's still gonna be something like that to account for. So I think that would probably be why I would not be particularly focused on this point. My so in terms of the design itself, is there anything you want to say of your own before we move on to a few other points that I wanted to make about Coelophysis?
Honestly, I don't know if I would say it's my favorite or up there my favorite designs, but it's really good. I don't have any complaints about it. I'm looking at it right now. I have a picture of the prehistoric kingdom Coelophysis for reference. But honestly, I think Walking with Dinosaurs, their Coelophysis is it's pretty solid. I think I remember watching one video talking about, well, um what did Walking with Dinosaurs get wrong? And I think they made a point of like, well, Coelophysis should have feathers. It's like, no, no, and I don't want to like go on for the tangent about that, but we don't have that evidence, guys. And we'll talk about that another time, but just no, we don't have that evidence. We don't know, so it's a moot point, and I think for right now, I think the Seal of Vices is pretty solid. I guess in terms of lips, I really couldn't determine if the Seal of Vice. I couldn't really see if there was any coverage or not. But like you said, it could also be because the way the model was design and the fact that Coelophysis has small teeth to begin with. Maybe the teeth were just like really, really small and you couldn't see them. But I mean, even strictly from an aesthetic perspective, I think it looks fine, even if it did have lips. So all in all, I'm happy with the design itself. So what were some of the other points you had about Coelophysis?
Well, yes, before I move on to that, I wanted to say that I agree. I'm overall very much fine with it, and regardless of whether the intention was to show the concealed mouth with lips or not, because it turned out to be fine. Basically, that's also what I'd say I share that sentiment. Now, the other
Yeah.
point I wanted to mention was I think that the color scheme was pretty well chosen, despite being quite vibrant overall, you can tell with all this patterning and all that stuff for what I believe is about a 3 meter long animal, which is still very slender and very lean animal as well. So it wasn't heavy, it was very light and probably very agile, which I thought was a very interesting and nice portrayal of it. I liked seeing scenes where it was actually shown very obviously how Coelophysis was taking advantage of its agility in comparison to other animals that were there with it.
Hmm.
And it almost made me think of if I were to see what would be an equivalent of a fox among dinosaurs. Coelophysis just makes it a very. It basically makes me think that it's a very good candidate for that sort of nickname or like colloquial comparison, if you will. A fox of dinosaurs, yes, I would probably say Coelophysis is a candidate. It's not the only one I can think of. I can think of a few others, but the one, as far as this series is concerned, I would definitely say that Coelophysis comes to mind in that regard. That's one thing. The other thing I wanted to note is, as far as also we know, however, Coelophysis appeared on the record, in a fossil record, as early as 215 million years ago, and this setting takes us back to 220, which means it's basically a bit outside of the target time period. because what could have happened, actually, if I am correct, of course, on this, that if they decided, they could have just said, taken this whole setting to 200 and, let's say, 15 million years, and that way every single creature that they've mentioned there, that they showed, would have been perfectly fine as far as the time period goes. I don't believe that any of them go extinct at the point of 215 million. They still persist for a little bit at least, or included that time anyway. So everything else that gets shown should still be okay at 215 million years point. But they picked 220, so that means Coelophysis technically came there from the future, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. And the other,
Yeah.
let me see if there's anything else. I mean, as far as its vocal part and aspect is concerned, I am very kind of torn on this because while they don't make it roar, it does appear to be quite a loud type of creature, but then again, it's not entirely unknown for reptiles, and I am also including birds into this, regardless of how derived they are. Because I want people to actually get used to the idea that birds are actually reptiles too. They're not just birds on its own. Because if we are saying
Right.
that birds are dinosaurs, then by default, by proxy, birds are reptiles also. You cannot have one
Mm-hmm.
without the other, So, it's either that or that. And the thing to notice, yes, even if we look at non-avian reptiles of today, there's quite a few of them, like geckos and crocodilians as well. They are quite vocal, actually. And I'm not talking about just hissing, I'm talking about actually making sounds. A good example is Tokay Gecko, but there are probably others out there who make similar type of sounds as well. And that kind of. But to be fair, when it came to the way they portrayed Coelophysis, I kind of thought that this is something that I was thinking, is that like similar or inspired by a mix of maybe a gecko and a magpie or something? You know? Like, the way it vocalized kind of made me immediately, for some reason, associate it with that. So I don't know, what are your thoughts when it comes to how it was vocalized in that sense, the sound design, let's just say that.
Well, one thing I will say about the sound design for Walking with Dinosaurs is that I know the team got very creative with some of their dinosaur sounds, which I like because the dinosaurs don't just sound like you just ripped certain sound effects from mammals or birds or reptiles and you plastered them onto dinosaurs. That like they all have a relatively unique sound um, to each species, which I like a lot. For example, and I refuse to watch the video that points this out because I'm worried it's going to ruin this for me. But apparently, some of the calls for Allosaurus are modified monkey calls. So some of those classic Allosaurus roars that we get, or those at least the classic Allosaurus sound effects. I don't know if they were the roars, but they are modified monkey vocalizations. So I can only imagine that Coelophysis would have had they probably could have gotten from mammals. They could have gotten from magpies, maybe some hissing from geckos. I'd have to look into that further. Unfortunately, I don't know that off the top of my head. But if they were able to conceal monkey calls for Allosaurus very easily, who's to say that they didn't use um, very specific sounds that they modified to hide how easily they would have sounded for other dinosaurs.
Yes, I'm in agreement with that as well. So let's quickly make a comment about the images that you have presented, just to briefly explain the slide a bit more for those who are actually watching, and maybe for those who are listening, so that they understand what we have in front of us. So let's let's talk about this.
Sure. Yeah. So one of the nice things that Walking with Dinosaurs has in terms of images is they have, as far as I'm aware, almost every single animal except for well, we won't have to worry about this until Walking with Monsters. But almost every single animal throughout the entire franchise has their own personal species card, and it's just the basically just the model of the animal with a black background in the corner there. It's like Walking with Dinosaurs or Walking with Beasts, chased by dinosaurs, chased by sea monsters, and then they have the name of the creature in that picture. So I actually find it to be really convenient for me because then I don't have to worry about getting a really good screenshot of the animal. You can just use the one with the black background, and you can just have that as an isolated image of the model before you compare with everything else. So for every single slide that I have of all the animals in this episode, and ideally the rest of the series, there will be one picture of the dinosaur or other animal with a black background, with some minor exceptions. So that's what the Coelophysis in the upper left corner there with the text above its head is supposed to be. Now, I also wanted a picture of the Coelophysis either from the documentary or one of the production images that was made. I believe the image in the middle here with the whole group drinking from the drying riverbed is actually from the book, the companion book to Walking with Dinosaurs. And I wanted to add that in there to have a picture of it shown in its setting. I also think it's important to point out that one a very big point made in the episode is Coelophysis's social life. There's, as far as we can tell, the bone beds at Ghost Ranch and like maybe one or two other places of Coelophysis, we it's not confirmation, but it's decent evidence to support that these things were gregarious. Now, one of the things I like about Walking with Dinosaurs is that they do not portray the Coelophysis social life like these were primates or social birds. They very much have a quality of it's almost like it's sort of reptilian in nature, kind of like where you have a whole um, group of crocodiles, and even though they tolerate one another, there is aggression between individuals, and that is shown a couple of times in the episode, as well as a scene of cannibalism, which I really like. It doesn't make the Coelophysis look more mammalian or avian than maybe it should be. So that's the point of the middle image there of the Coelophysis by the riverbed. Um, as with when dinosaurs roamed America, I thought it would be good to just have a picture of the skeleton to compare of Coelophysis. So this is a picture from Scott Hartman of Coelophysis boweri, and I wanted to have that there in case there's any morphological issues that the model had. Although, to the best of my knowledge, I think it should be fine. And then I have another picture of the prehistoric kingdom Coelophysis, which right now is one of my personal favorites, uh, favorite depictions of the animal itself. And it's mostly just for consistency because there will be other times where we will look at a model and think, wow, that just aged poorly. Here's a more updated version of the animal itself. So that's why I have the prehistoric kingdom model there and the skeleton of Coelophysis there. But like I said, like we've been talking about before, I think the model for Coelophysis in Walking with Dinosaurs is actually holds up pretty well. So honestly, just take this as more confirmation that the Coelophysis model itself is actually pretty solid.
I wanted to add a bit on the aspects that when it comes to the footage available where to draw from, when it, the source itself, there's just so much stuff and images that they have created, both to their mostly to their like merchandise, like the books and stuff like that. When it
Right.
comes to this franchise, that it's super easy to find a decent screenshot of a specific animal that you know if you need to use it for whatever project, like the way we do. And the other thing as well that I really found interesting, to the point of when you say that they do group up, but they don't. It's like they're not one big happy family. If you basically yawn and fall asleep, then somebody will betray you and stab you in the back, and everybody else is gonna be eating you. So it's like this basically. That's the kind of environment they live there. That's the atmosphere, if you will. It's not all
Right. Right.
nice and friendly. So, and I
Are we? Are we?
Yeah,
Sorry, I was gonna say quickly, are we saying then that Coelophysis are the dinosaur equivalent of Skaven?
I kind of want to say yes. I mean, obviously, for those who don't know, Skaven is a faction and technically like a race of you know, of for people, quote unquote, people that are basically humanoid rats, if you will, and they are considered to be, I guess, evil faction, which frequently aligns with chaos. But they also act independently and are a massive pain in the ass for everyone else. Pretty much, it depends on what you know depending on the interest. So it's a bit of a tangent here, but yes, in case you don't know who Skaven are, they are from a Warhammer Fantasy franchise. So there we go. Yes, and that's very much characteristic of what I think would apply to the way they are portraying the Coelophysis. That they would, especially when they gather around, at that watering hole, and there's like, this was actually a great shot. Which I think is actually the one that you include in this slide as well, which is taken from that particular scene where there's just so freaking many of them. And
Yeah,
it was quite cool to watch, but at the same time, I'm just like, wow, that's like inviting for a whole lot of confrontations there. There's just way too little space for this many animals coming so close to each other. And if they find someone who is like particularly weaker or smaller than all the other ones, what's gonna happen is that the smaller and weaker one is just gonna get beaten up and eaten eventually because nature. So yeah, it would be pretty cool to see a bit more of that stuff. But I was happy with that scene a lot. In fact, this is actually one of my favorite scenes in this whole episode. So
right. No, I thought it was great. Don't have any complaints about it.
okay, now as far as Seal of Isis is concerned, I'm quite happy with it. If you don't have anything else to add, would you like to move on to the next animal?
Yeah, I'm down to move on to the next animal.
Okay, in this case, we're moving on to drum rolls, the mighty Placerias. It's quite a big, stocky animal. Obviously, they
Yeah,
they are from a family that, to my knowledge, was very successful as a whole across the entire world, and there's just many, many different types of them, and one of them, especially that was not yet known at that time, but unfortunately, but it's a Polish one that is a from your ancestral home, right? So,
right,
what's
right, exactly. Yeah,
Lisovicia or something like that? I think it's called. It's
right,
definitely
right,
something like this, and it's absolutely massive. In fact, it rivals some of the ceratopsian dinosaurs in size, if I'm correct. So,
hmm
yeah, what would you like to comment in regards to, uh, you know, well, first of all, the portrayal in the show, and then after that, yes, again, go over the slide.
So I do have a few more notes on Placerias than I do on Coelophysis. Um, I will say right off the bat, the model is great. I love it. Um, I think there's been some depictions of Placerias where the tusks kind of stick out a little bit further outward instead of being sort of so straight. But honestly, I'm willing to let that slide for this one because it's an otherwise really, really good model. It's one of my favorites. I mean, it was my first introduction to Placerias when I was a kid, and it's a really it really conveys the stockiness and the bulk of the animal itself. The sort of ridge of bone that's in the back of the skull. It's a little bit hidden in the model, but it's not a huge distraction. Honestly, you can see it when they're drinking from the river right there, and it's a great model. The sound effects I really like. Again, I have no idea how they got those, but it's got a really good sound to it. Gives like this. It's a deep rumbling roar of sorts that I really enjoy. So the model itself is great. I have no complaints about the model. Now,
Can
in
I
terms,
quickly sorry to interrupt you. Can I quickly make
yeah.
a comment and maybe ask you if there's something, if this is something you are aware of? Is there a
Hmm.
possibility that the shape and protrusion direction of their tusks might be uh, based on individual variation? Is there basically room for individual variation, or is anatomy of Placerias on that part especially quite strict and does not tend to have that sort of wiggle room?
I could totally believe that Placerius had individual variation among its tusks. Now, I forget if I don't know for sure. I don't know for sure. I'd have to double check my sources on that, but it would not surprise me. So that's actually a really good point on how much wiggle room there is for the Placerius tusks being straight or being outwards to the sides. And I will just have to look into it a bit more. But it would not surprise me if Placerius does have a degree of individual variation among animals with their tusks. I would say yes, but I'll have to get back to you on that.
And the other thing as well, that also brings me to the next point about tusks, is whether or not there is, again, enough reasons to suggest that the lengths of them and the mass and length of them could also vary, or would they still be maintaining a relatively short length? Let's just say as long maximum as long as shown in the show, or could they get even bigger? That's the question.
So unfortunately, I don't think we have enough evidence or information to support that. I know Dicynodonts, most of the time, Dicynodonts do not have very, very big tusks. Like even things like Lysowisha or Canamaieria or some of these other bigger Dicynodonts do not have. It's not like they have tusks in the same way that like a small elephant would, or have saber teeth like a saber-toothed cat, or even like some strange Dicynodonts back in the Permian that had some bizarre. They had some stuff going on with their tusks, and maybe we'll come back. We'll talk about that in a later video. But in fact, some of the larger Triassic Dicynodonts didn't even have tusks. So I don't know if that was that's a point of research I think would be really cool, but I couldn't tell you exactly what was going on there. So the jury is still out, but I think that would be a really interesting thing to look into.
Okay, cool. Well, in that case, let's keep our eyes open, I suppose. And
Yeah.
in any case, would you like to? I've interrupted you rudely in that
No, you're
moment.
fine. You're fine. You're
So,
good.
would you like
Um,
to continue on that one?
yeah. Let me check my notes here. So the herding behavior is defensible. One of the biggest sites we have at Placerias is literally called the Placerias Quarry in the Chinle Formation. So herding wise, I think it's perfectly defensible. I will say also that one thing I like is that they don't make the Placerias into mammals and make them have like very strong ties to individuals, or because I think with animals like these, there's a good chance that they might have grouped together, but that it was every Placerias for themselves. I don't know if these were animals that had very strong social bonds, at least from what I can tell about Placerius and from what little I know about Dicynodons. So they could have congregated in very large groups, but I'm also glad the documentary didn't go so far as to make them give them a greater sense of complexity with their sociability than was defensible. So I appreciate that. Actually, side note, the book actually is a bit more blunt by saying that the Placerius just after they lay their eggs and their offspring hatch, they do not protect them at all. So that's actually a funny note from the book. So the herding structure of Placerius, I'm cool with. Really, my bigger issue is the way that they're described as an endangered species, which I'm willing to just chalk up to being just bad a scripting issue. But the thing is, um, first and foremost, Placerius was by no means the last Dicynodont. I think for the longest time there was this idea that Placerius was the last of the Dicynodonts, but Lysowisha lived after. lived after Placerias, and Pentasaurus, which I believe might be the latest Dicynodont that we know of. Pentasaurus is a Dicynodont from the lower Elliott Formation of South Africa, and both of these animals lived after Placerias. So we don't know. I don't know exactly how diverse Dicynodonts were back during that part of the Triassic, but Placerias was not the last of its kind. And even if it were like the last Dicynodont on the planet, that does not specifically make it an endangered species. It could have been incredibly common for its time, but it would just have been the last Dicynodont. It's just more of a wording issue that I think just gives off like someone could mistaken it for being very rare when Placerias, as far as we can tell, was actually decently common. So that was more of a wording thing on my end that I took issue with. The other thing that I have in my notes is there's no hard evidence that Placerias hesternus specifically was migratory, but I will say that Placerias had a pretty decent geographic range. We have material of it in the Peck Information in North Carolina, which is very, very far east compared to Arizona. And it's, as far as I'm aware, it's the same species, Placerias hesternus. So unless it's a very different species of Placerias, this was an animal that actually had a pretty decent geographic range. Now, does that evidence for migration? I don't really know, but obviously this thing was traveling quite a bit because compared to some other animals that we've talked about in the past and we'll talk about, down the in this episode actually, this thing actually had a pretty decent geographic range. So, it's not impossible for it to be migratory, but, you know, that specifically I couldn't exactly prove. Um, the only other thing I will say about Placerius, and this is probably the biggest issue I have with it in the episode, is that there's a scene in the beginning where they have the Placerius wandering about, and they have the Coelophysis. She's stalking the herd. According to the narrator, Placerius is prey to Coelophysis, and they have a quick scene of a Coelophysis basically harassing a Placerius that has apparently isolated it from the rest of the herd. And my only thought is, there is no way that a Coelophysis is going to be a threat to, like, a single Coelophysis is going to be a threat to a Placerius. If it was a whole swarm and they had isolated an injured animal, that's one thing. But a single Coelophysis is not going to take down a Placerius. And I just thought that was a rather funny sequence of shots and dialogue because, yeah, no, Placerius would stop a single Coelophysis. And again, like, the only way this would have worked is if they had a scene of a whole army of Coelophysis going after a severely injured or a very old or sick Sirius. So that
Yeah,
was
a
that was kind of a
Placerias,
funny
basically
one.
healthy, unharmed, in its prime, is going to mop the floor with an entire horde of Coelophysis. I can probably say I won't be exaggerating if I make that rather bold, maybe, and stretchy kind of claim, but I think it's pretty reasonable to say that a, a, a very big and healthy Placerias is absolutely just out of the league when it comes to even multiple Coelophysis. They're just not built to take animals down like that. In fact, I would go out on a limb and say that Coelophysis probably are built to take down animals that are much smaller than them, maybe faster animals, or any kind of animals that rely basically on speed and agility, which Coelophysis did as well. And so in any case, it was not a power-built animal at all. It was an awesome animal, but it was not built to take down something like a Placerias. So
No, no.
that's that's basically almost, to me, it's almost like saying, can a heron take down, I don't know, a capybara? No freaking way it's ever gonna happen. So
Right, right.
it's just not possible, and I don't think even multiples of them would be a match for a healthy, again, mind you, uninjured, healthy Placerias in its prime. If it's, as you
Right.
said, if it's an injured animal and it's on its last breath, it's, barely able to keep up because it's drained of its energy. So yeah, of course, bite by bite, bit by bit, they can just finish the job. But it's not like they would be physically capable of actually hunting an animal like that. I would maybe make an argument if there was a baby Placerias there somewhere. That could have been a very interesting, twist of events there. Just seeing how that baby would be under so much pressure, from these pesky Coelophysis. I suppose that could be a thing.
I would like to see that. In fact, the book even mentions like, I mean, this is super hypothetical, but they argue that Placerius, um, they laid so many young that they were sort of picked off, but like sort of like turtles, and only a handful would be able to reach maturity because of how many would die as a result. So, I think a scene where a Coelophysis were to just grab a baby Placerius and head off, I think that would have been, I would have preferred that over the Coelophysis basically thinking it was some badass and trying to confront a Placerius that just wasn't having any of its crap. So,
Yeah, and I think basically, for all intents and purposes, when it comes to this environment here, Placerias was the tank, basically. Here, there is no argument. It's a massive animal, incredibly strong. You know, there's not a lot you can do with it. You can't exactly argue with it either if I were to make that case
no,
when it comes to being something as delicate and slim as and fragile as a Coelophysis. There's just no way you can ever, not not in your dreams, basically.
no,
So,
right, right.
um, but yeah, that actually was something that I noticed, and I'm glad you brought this up because I immediately thought, yeah, there is no way these two can ever be um, declared as predator and prey direct relationship. The only way, again, if it's a baby, if it's an already injured and potentially dying, on its last breath, Placerias, and if it's already dead, and then they just come up to clean up the whole thing. So, because why not? It doesn't matter if an animal is dead. You can just take the carcass for yourself for as long as you can, if there is no other predator, obviously, that's trying to contest it. So, anything else you would like to comment on the Placerias, and maybe if not, then perhaps the just brief description of what you decided to include in the slide.
Sure. I think I've said as much as I can about the episode's depiction of Placerias. So the slide here, again, actually very similar to the Coelophysis. Uh, it's not like there's a huge contrast between how the Placerius looks in the episode and what current paleo art of it looks like. Honestly, finding good Placerius art is surprisingly hard because of how many people want to like add fuzz to it and all that. And it's like, again with Coelophysis, we do not have evidence of that, guys. We just don't. And again, we'll save that rant for another time. But it's like, no, Placerius probably did not have fuzz. Now, with that being said, I did find this one good image of Placerius by I think it was Nobu Temura or something, and it actually is a pretty good image of both the hurting structure of Placerius and also the body itself. The skull looks great. Again, it's maybe some slight differences, but overall, it's a um, pretty good with this one. And then also, there's the skeleton that I have of Placerius, and then just a picture of it, um, picture of the herd from the episode. So that's just the structure of the slide itself.
Okay, sounds good. And I guess I can appreciate the fact that, yes, if we do have this idea that they tend to frequently be the victims of excessive influffening, or maybe not excessive, but just general influffening, then again, it might be quite difficult to find a depiction that does not envision them that way. Since, again, they're not mammals proper, we don't really know, how likely, unless there is evidence, which I don't know if there was or not, of them specifically, or the big ones anyway. I mean, I've always found them to be very complicated to understand as a group of animals, but from what I can understand, there hasn't really been any evidence to support the idea that they would be fluffy, if you will, or fuzzy. Let's just say that much. So I don't know. What
Mhm.
anything you've heard of or not?
Well, I mean, unless you consider those strands of quote unquote hair in that Permian coprolite uh, that was found back years ago, people cite that as evidence of, well, therapsids had to have fuzz. It's like, we don't know if that was hair, guys. I don't want to get uppity already, but like, that's not. We don't know what that is. Jeffrey, I think, even said it could have been plant fibers. So who knows what that could have been? Using that as evidence to suggest that therapsids had fuzz is outside of therocephalians and cynodonts, but that's for different reasons. For anything like dicynodonts, dinocephalians, gorgonopsians, anything like that, it's just like, no, no, that's not evidence, and you gotta do better. I'm sorry, I just get a little bit upset because I've seen way too many horrifically bad um, fuzzy therapsids to be willing to entertain that these strands in a coprolite are going to be evidence of fuzz. So that's just save it for the Permian video, John. Save it for the Permian video.
Do you want a handkerchief?
I'm not crying, although I could probably use something for my brow because I'm going to break a sweat.
Well, okay. Well, I'm glad to hear you're not shedding any tears, but I could tell that you were getting a little bit on a, borderline there. I mean, you know how it is. You start with a rant and then it ends with tears. So,
Okay.
yeah, whatever you say, bro. In it. But anyways, I are you happy with everything else as far as Placerias goes?
Yeah, I'm great with Placerias. It's a great model, great design, great depiction. Got no complaints.
Yeah, I'm of the same opinion as well. It's actually, as far as the non-dinosaur creatures go, this is definitely on my top list as well. So that's a second creature from the entire franchise so far that I can think of that is on my top design list as far as that goes. So, yeah, well, there it is. But in any case, I am noticing that obviously the video is getting almost to 1 hour length. So what we will do is we will stop the recording here, and we will be back for part 2, where we're just going to take over straight away by continuing, our review and going over the rest of the animals. So if you have just finished watching this video, guys, please bear in mind part 2 is coming. It's gonna come very soon, if not right away, because we are recording it all at the same time, so there's not gonna be like 6 months break between part 1 and part 2, so don't worry about that. Right, so in any case, thank you for so much for watching so far, and we will see you in part 2 for episode 1, The New Blood of Walking with Dinosaurs.
Sounds good.